Welcome to the Authentic Change Podcast. I'm Mike Horn, your host, and this podcast is for leaders and coaches who need and want fresh perspectives on what it means to live and to lead authentically. You're a leader who wants to make a difference, but sometimes you feel stuck. You know there's more to life and to leadership than what you're currently experiencing. It can be tough to figure out how to grow as a leader. You might be reading all the blogs and books, but it still feels like you're not making progress. You might even be feeling like you're doing everything wrong. On Authentic Change with Mike Horn, we interview experts who share their insights on how to live and lead authentically. Our guests are trendsetters in building great leaders, teams, and organizations. We provide fresh perspectives on what it means to live with purpose and authenticity. Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Change Podcast.
Welcome to this edition of Authentic Change with Mike Horn. I am so delighted to have in our virtual studio today Dr. Marie-Helene Pelletier. And from now on, with her suggestion and provocation, I'm going to refer to her as MH. So welcome, but formally, once again, Dr. Marie-Helene Pelletier. And all of that will be in the show notes about where to find her and how to be in touch with her. But let's talk a little bit about MH. And let me tell you why I'm so excited about having her as a guest today. Throughout her career in business management and psychology, MH has spearheaded a national dialogue, and I believe she refers to Canada in this context, a national dialogue, on the crucial issues of leadership resilience and workplace health. Drawing on her extensive background in corporate, insurance, governance, and public sectors, she brings national and international perspectives and expertise on mental health and resilience as a key pillar of overall health. She is a bilingual practicing psychologist with over 20 years' experience in clinical psychology and advisory workplace psychology, and holds a PhD and MBA from the University of British Columbia. MH is a member of the Global Clinical Practice Network of WHO and past director on the boards of the Canadian Psychological Association and the International Association of Applied Psychology. She has presented and authored and co-authored a number of industry and academic publications and has won numerous academic and industry awards, including the Industry Leadership Award from Benefits Canada. MH, welcome. What an impressive background. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Mike. The background, it just has happened, a lot of it by me following my nose, literally, in terms of what was of interest to me. But in a nutshell, background is in psychology, both clinical and counseling psychology. Did my research 20 years ago on telehealth. So doing psychotherapy via video conferencing, which 20 years ago, it was a thing because you could not do it.
Oh my gosh. I have to say that at some period, perhaps even longer than that, I worked for a company called Nortel Networks. And they were big promoters of teleworking at that period of time. We were all going into this experience of telework. So I'm sorry I interrupted, but made me recall that.
Well, and that's the thing. It's as if sometimes when we touched on these topics, yes, people have different experiences that we didn't realize were going to become as significant as they are now. It's amazing to think back. And so, and for me, so did that kind of research, which required a lot of working with people, keeping teams, even if they were a volunteer for a whole year, so that they would not influence the variability in the research, and required a fair bit of funding also to do all this, which then led me to do business training, so that MBA program part-time. Basically, then I worked in workplace mental health for a few decades in private sector, public sectors, insurance carriers, building overall mental health strategies for large insurance carriers and all their group benefits clients. And then after a few of these years of doing this work, started working on my own with mostly professional speaking, advisory to individuals and organizations, and coaching, and still keeping a small psychology practice in which I work mostly with professionals and leaders.
And what have you noticed as differences pre and post pandemic as it relates to mental health, your initials MH, and what are you discovering in workplace settings?
Ah, how long do you have, Mike? Right? A lot, definitely a lot. I would say that if one of the things that I'm seeing, especially now, so there was, of course, the whole adaptation, there was the during, and there is the moment in time now where, in some ways, tail end, in some other ways, beginning of other challenges that are going on in the global scale that are part of the demands on us, whether they're close to us or a bit distant, they're still part of our overall demands, I would call it. And so I think at this point, it's a moment where we may mistakenly assume that we've adapted, we've made the changes, we've figured out whatever state our individual situation is in or the situations of our teams. Like, okay, maybe there is some hybrid work, or we figured out the work from home situation, whatever it is, and making the assumption that it's done and we can now keep going forward. And no, things are continuing to change. And the level of change, the pace of change is continuing probably to increase, which in itself, if that's the reality, that's the reality. What's most important is that we just adapt how we work with it and become agile in creating plans that are that we can modify and evolve over time.
And this is so great. In part, your expertise is in resilience. And next year, 2024, not so far away, you'll have a new book out in the marketplace, The Resilience Plan, a strategic approach for optimizing your work performance and mental health. I've read an advanced copy. It's phenomenal. And I encourage everyone in our audience, particularly those who are human resources executives and leaders or other organizational leaders, to consider this concept of resilience. But let's dig into it with Dr. MH. What is resilience, and why is it important? Why do we talk so much about it? Why do we hear it? But what is it?
Yes. So many definitions. The one I usually work with is our ability to go through adversity and come out even stronger. So ability to go through adversity, come out even stronger. So in order to do that, that means we're going to have adversity, additional demands, sometimes many of them unexpected, larger ones coming, and we'll be able to sustain, grow, and come out even stronger after. And so to do this, there are things we can put in place. And often what I hear in my work, hence the book and the desire to bring this message out even more to save people time, seriously, time and pain, is that we need to invest in it in a strategic way. And because often what people don't realize is that just a cookie cutter approach, because we know, like everyone on the planet knows the kinds of things we may want to do to increase resilience, like sleep, exercise, eating well, and there are many others. Cookie cutter approach is not working. We're still seeing the burnout rates we're seeing. We're still seeing increases. And so in burnout, in mental health challenges in general. So just having this information is not cutting it. We need to be strategic about it.
Well, is everyone born with a supply of resilience, and then it just diminishes over time, or are there ways that we renew resilience? What sort of supply is it?
Yes. So number one, it's not a personality trait. There are personality traits that are a bit more associated with resilience, like optimism, for example, but mostly it isn't something we're born with. It's something that we build over time. And yes, some of our experiences may make us a bit more resilient, but it will vary in time based on a number of things, the amounts of demands we're facing, the amount of supply we bring in, the context around us, how much our values are represented in our daily personal and professional lives. So many things will influence it, which means we can consciously, deliberately do things to influence it. So no, not born with it, thankfully. We've got lots of agency, lots of opportunities to influence it.
And what are some of the ways that we treat this resource then? How do we develop it? How do we nurture it? How do we grow it?
Yes, and that is the direction we want to go to. And I'll even step back one notch. We need to do all these things. The mistake number one is thinking, I'm strong. I'm a rock. I've always been resilient. I will always be. Therefore, and I'm really busy, I don't have time to do anything to nurture this. I don't need to, and I don't have time. So I just carry on. That's mistake number one. So I love your question of how do we build it? And the first thing is to realize we have to. And it's not going to be a massive investment of time. Sometimes people think, oh, God, I don't have time for this. I've got so many things on my plate, until they don't have a choice, until the battery is close to zero, right? So what we want, if battery is really high right now, fantastic. We want to protect it and build it even more. If it's a bit lower than usual, we want to bring it back as soon as we can, because we don't know which demands will come here. And so ways to build it, I'll give you some examples of the ways, and some of them, everyone in the audience can think about them. Yes, it's true. Protecting our sleep, making sure we exercise on a regular basis. What we're eating, we're going to see even more of this in the research in the next 5 years. It's very clear the way we eat has a strong influence on our overall psychological health and resilience. Protecting our relationships, time spent with people with whom we enjoy spending time with, time in nature, volunteer work. The list could go on. In fact, Mike, I was looking at a message from one of the very famous publishers in business literature recently, and they were sending the name of the message was, here are the things you need to do to build your resilience. And there was a list of about 22 articles one was to read to know what they need to know to carry on. No one's going to read 22 articles. And even if they did, how are you going to implement any of this? And that's my point in this book. Yes, it's something to know what the research says. And all the things I mentioned are research-based, solid. We know return on investment is going to be there if we implement. What's not happening is the implementation. And that's why I'm bringing the strategic angle, so that we actually step back for a moment and look into the strategic tools we use in business over here, use them for our own resilience. And then we're going to have a plan that we're able to execute on, that is realistically implementable.
Personally, what led you to this topic, MH? I mean, what was the path that took you to study and have an interest in mental health, and in particular, resilience?
Yes. When I started my work, early career, I had the chance to go live and work in a northern region, very small, isolated mining town, very small and everything. And I did, as one of the only psychologists there, work in a number of different areas. I had supervision from the city to do that, and the whole thing. But one of the areas I had the chance to work in was Employee and Family Assistance Program. Ages ago, but still. And I was absolutely fascinated with how I was lucky enough to work with clients who would never have gone and talked to a psychologist somewhere, found the time and all this. But because it was covered, it was an easy 1-800 number. They called, they booked, it was covered, they sat in front of me. And what that meant is many times they were coming earlier in the process, not when they were at zero. Sometimes, yes, but sometimes a bit earlier, where we could be proactive. And that's where resilience fits in. It's a very strength-based approach to our psychological health, where we can catch things while they're good and build back from there, which means just like our physical pain, right? We catch things earlier, we're going to not feel as much pain and get back to health faster. Works the same way for our psychological health. And that's a big part of what got me passionate about resilience itself.
Oh, that's great. And do you think about resilience as an immunity? One of the, I was lucky to study and do a coaching certificate with Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy on the immunity to change, and thinking about what keeps us, what prevents us from change. Do you think about resilience as one of our immunities, or how do you consider that?
Yes. For the work that I do and with people I work with, I very often will actually warn them that this is not immunity. It's very important because they tend to want a solution, a resource, something that's fully in their hands and that they can proactively implement and be therefore immunized from. So not that. And that's very important because when we're looking at burnout specifically, and I know you're very familiar with this, but just so we're all on the same page, burnout is the relationship between an individual and their workplace. So it's in between. So therefore, it would be a clear mistake to think that here, as an individual, we can do all the things. So even if somehow we could fit in 7 hours a day of resilience building, it would still not be immunity. Because if we are in an environment here, a team or an organization that is absolutely not healthy, toxic, we can't win here. So no, it can't be immunity, but we want to build it as much as we can, because either we'll need this strength, this resilience to optimize how we manage this situation, or even make the decision to leave, right? So not immunity, I would call it protective factor. Protective factors. It's protecting us, but it's not solid immunity.
That's interesting. So it has these protective and curative properties, which we might also think about as a type of resistance. At least that's certainly how I do. I think about resistance as having different properties, one being protection, one being cure, one being a need to break through it. So in your construction of this stage of resilience, or thinking about resilience, it really seems to require some new outlooks and approaches that people take on. Is that right? Or what would you be suggesting in that regard, MH?
It does this. And, when I was, that's my only book. That's so far. There may be others in the future, but that's my first. And so if anyone's interested in writing a book, send me a note. I'll tell you how much work this is. But it's also fascinating. One of the fascinating steps is at some point you have advanced readers, but sometimes even before then, you may do a book workshop where you're workshopping the ideas, the concepts of your book. So I did that. I had people virtual from around the world actually, collected together and going through and then providing feedback. I had the chance to have someone who took that workshop, who then later on brought me as an in-house speaker to actually do that same workshop with her entire team. And so this individual ended up hearing the same content twice. So, and what she reflected on was how the first time it changed her outlook. And she was saying, oh, I wish I had thought of all this 6 years ago and even 6 months ago, because it would have given me way more comfort, power, and psychological help. But she implemented her plan then. And then it was about 4 or 5 months later that I was in their workplace in person delivering this. So what she did here is she sort of, gave herself to the workshop and went all in and talked to me after. And she said, okay, here's what's happening now. I came to this workshop wanting to play along just with my team and, entirely go into it myself. And she realized that her goals from the first one were now achieved. Some of the core concepts of building her strategic plan were the same, like our values, for example, tend to be stable over time. But the demands were different. The context was different. And adjusting her plan took so little time for her, because that shift in mindset and how she was thinking about her overall resilience had happened already a few months ago. So yes, it creates a shift, and the beauty, which is also what I'm talking about there, because others reported the same thing. Once you've shifted your approach, it's not going to take a lot of time, and it makes a massive difference.
Well, it's great. And I'm sure that everyone will be able to find out more in the resilience plan, the strategic approach to optimizing your work performance and mental health. So I'm curious, though, based on the last description that you had, MH, is how does a person go about designing a custom plan for resiliency that helps them in the long run?
Yes, exactly. Mike, similar to if you and I were starting a business and we wanted to launch a new product in the universe, we would probably want to define what we're thinking of doing. And we would want to look at, okay, anyone else doing the same thing? Anyone interested in this kind of thing? What are the forces impacting this context? What do you and I value that we really want to make sure we bring? What's our core focus? right? So all those tools, the SWOT analysis that we would see in a business plan, right? The market analysis, we would do all this and then prepare our launch, right? So same idea here. What we're wanting is to look at what are my core values as an individual, both professionally and personally. Right away, we're now centered here, not what everyone wants me to do. Where am I at? Okay. Then I'm going to look at the sources of demand and supply around me, both personal life and professional. Often people I work with are thinking work specific. Wait a second. If your best friend is just leaving a relationship, if another friend is having someone important in their life leave this earth for what, if they're moving to a new apartment, these are all things that are also part of our demands, positive and not so positive, right? So really assessing this really well, assessing my sources of supply. And then literally I get them through an equivalent of a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, internal and external, in our lives. So then we've got the real picture. And that's what makes the difference now in the plan between knowing all the things and translating these things in my realistic context in a way that I can do it. So what that means is an initial plan of I'll exercise 5 times 30 minutes a week, and oops, it never happens because it doesn't work in my schedule, may become, now that I've explored all this, I'm going to commit to a 5-minute walk at the end of my morning before lunch to the corner of the street and back. Okay. Yes, it's not, eventually we'll want to build it, but this is something as opposed to nothing. And now we've started the habit. We're in line with my values. I'm building a sense of self-efficacy that I can do this. And that's what now opens the door to all those other changes that will be very positive.
Yes, and the first steps are always so essential to any effective change plan or effective change strategy. Is part of the equation is to think about the first steps that we can take in order to advance our goal and move us into a new transformed state. As I consider your work and to look forward to the resilience plan, a strategic approach to optimizing your work performance and mental health next year in 2024, I wonder about the place of values and individual values. In the work that I do as an executive coach, helping people to bring their best to every situation, we often start and discuss throughout a coaching engagement the role of values and how that defines so much of our behavior. How does that fit into your work on resiliency and mental health, MH?
Yes, it's the beginning, the basis of creating that custom strategic plan. The same way a business would identify their core values, and that's going to guide some of their decisions. This plan is guiding our decisions. And we know from research on happiness, for example, that the key to experiencing that sense of flow and happiness is being clear on what our values are. And everyone is clear on a few values. I'm talking about many of your values, right? Going a bit broader and deeper, because that clarity then and the alignment between that clarity and how we build our daily, weekly, monthly, yearly life will then have an impact on our sense of happiness. So that's central. And I know you said it is central in your work as well. I found this to be central here based on research and my own work as well.
When I studied with Bob Keegan, Bob always used to say that he thought the purpose of immunity to change coaching was to eliminate some suffering. I disagree. I think it's really to find some happiness. And that's why in my last book on authenticity and integrity, I wrote that for me, it's all about congruency. And if I can align what I say and what I do, and even better, what I think, say, and do, then it creates a sense of happiness. And it's not the kind of happiness that comes with a new boyfriend or girlfriend or partner. It's kind of sustained happiness. And I think the research is also clear that we enjoy working with happy people. And I wonder, how does that all fit into the resilience plan? I mean, it sounds like these are adjacent neighbors. There's maybe two sides of a two-dimensional fence. How do you put all of that together?
Yes, they are together. I agree. I think it's all in that same system, maybe I'll call it. Love the word congruency, and very true. And when we're looking at burnout, say in the workplace, sometimes one of the factors that people experience is that lack of congruency, that moral injury that's created by our values being so misaligned with what needs to be done or how people want us to do it or whatever. And so that congruency is extremely important. And yes, we are, yes, in this system, there are different structures and there are different people. We are a community. And the ways in which we bring our best to what we do will influence others as well. Not only influencing in terms of we may be more interested in working with them, inspired by them and all this, but also we're modeling, we're showing to others how we're doing it. Their way may be different. But if we take these actions to invest in our own and share with others that we did, then yes, there is this notion of modeling. There's also this impact on the overall culture of this system, a culture in which we value taking at times moments of reflection, to whether it's read a book about authenticity or others, to refresh, reinvest in what's going to guide our next steps, and that we need to do this because a lot of people you work with, I work with, are literally fabulous from a number of perspectives, including their professional and leadership expertise, right? They've studied, worked, experienced all this. And sometimes they'll say, I can't believe I need to invest time in now this thing, like talking to people or being more resilient. It's not that complex, but it does require attention. And then that will influence the overall system and community.
It's one of the wonderful things I love about the Resilience Plan, your book in 2024, your upcoming release, is that you write that if you're anxious, to think about what's possible versus what's probable. And it's great advice. I've just been taking a course with Shirzad Chamine on positive intelligence, and he walks the participants in his coaching program through an exercise on what is good and what is bad. And perhaps it's a way of thinking about seeing the good that can come out of bad situations, even though we may not be able to do that in a moment. So I think there in the moment, I think about the connection with resilience, but I wonder if you could just expand or elaborate slightly on the relationship between, your wonderful statement about if you're anxious, think about what's possible versus probable, and why we need to approach this topic of resilience with some sense of urgency and diligence.
Yes. Well, one of the angles that I bring in the book, and we know from research and practice. So in psychology, one of the very researched areas is cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT. In the book, I talk about cognitive behavior self-management, where there are behaviors and actions we can take to really manage our thinking. And you're right, this particular suggestion is one that many of my clients respond to really quickly, because anxiety is a broad topic and will be very personal to each of us in different ways. At the same time, in my work with professionals and leaders, often one thing that helps them unclick from that anxious thinking is to step back and say, wait a second, how likely is this? So is this a possibility? Yes, it is. How likely? How probable? Oh, not very. Okay. So instead of focusing on just, this could happen, it could. It is a possibility, but it's not a high probability. And what we're doing in an exercise like this is managing our thinking. And that's immensely important, because one of the things I say too often, and I put this in the book too, is, in business, we often hear culture will eat strategy for breakfast. It's been attributed to different people over time, but it's a sentence many have heard. And what I say in my work is that unhelpful thoughts will eat your best intentions for breakfast. So you may intend to be a great leader, to be a reassuring, inspiring person, to be very effective today, and all these things. But then the unhelpful thoughts of, but I don't have time. This needs to go faster. I'll do this another day. Oops, it's been a month since I've done it. Will all get in the way. And we need to get ahead of these. And often, having done the time to step back and actually strategically plan, we'll do the same that it does for businesses, right? The idea of having a business plan over here is not just to have a document to give the bank or whoever else you need to give it to. It will protect you from your blind spots. That's part of what it does. You walk yourself through writing a business plan. It reminds you, oh, yes, need to think about this. So that's a bit of what this does here. Having a plan protects you from blind spots, including the cognitive ones.
And if you were to identify 2 or 3 reasons about why our listeners should add this as must reading to their 2024 business bookshop personal bookshelf, what would those 2 or 3 reasons be, MH?
First is many of my readers tell me this. They need an edge at work and in their personal life. And it needs to be an edge that's going to create results. And this one does, because I'm a very practical professional in all my work. And I've worked with people for a few decades now. So this is very, very practical. Literally, at the end of each chapter, there is an exercise. Sometimes it is a 1-minute exercise, and it's never more than 10. So it's very friendly in terms of time. So we need an edge, and that's what this book does. The planning is not long, and therefore, even if you have no time, you'll be able to do it. And the third one, reading a book, this book, it's a very concise book. It's not going to take you long either. If you've got a slightly longer flight, you can get through it on that flight. And so it's absolutely doable to bring it in your schedule, and it will probably change how you think about your overall contributions moving forward for the rest of your career.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, this idea of thinking about the future differently through resilience and mental health, about having the tools to really gain a practical edge, really a wonderful contribution and a great resource and a tool and an inspiration, I think, for all of us to come back to this topic of resilience and mental health and understand why it's so important in terms of our performance and mental health, but not only our personal performance, but also for leaders who are managing people-centered performance in their organization to really consider these topics. Dr. Pelletier, it has been wonderful to have you on Authentic Change with Mike Horn. And for those of you who want to get in touch with Dr. Marie-Helene Pelletier, please visit her on LinkedIn. Please visit her on Twitter. You'll find all of her ways to contact her and be in touch with her in the show notes. So, Dr. Marie-Helene Pelletier, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike. It was an absolute pleasure talking with you.
And until the next episode of Authentic Change with Mike Horn, stay well.
Thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast. I'm delighted that you've tuned in to listen. Please visit the show notes for links to topics discussed in today's podcast. To download a free ebook on authentic change and leadership and to subscribe to my newsletter, please visit mike-horn.com. Once again, mike-horne.com, mike-horn.com. Once again, thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast.